Hi, I'm Rachel Maclay. I am on the web app development team at Box.com. Specifically, I work on our frameworks team, so I'm going to be telling you a couple stories of things that have happened recently. We are working from a legacy code base, and we're trying to upgrade it to something more modern, putting some structure into it. So I'll go a little bit into what I define as a framework and kind of the problems we've encountered and how we've dealt with them. So first, we've all dealt with spaghetti code, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So at some point, you're several generations into your code base, and so you end up with this code that is difficult to read or follow. A lot of times at the beginning of a project, you're not quite sure where things are going, so you're just kind of throwing code and throwing ideas at a problem and seeing what happens. So you end up with this mess of a code base, which is difficult to read or follow. It's hard to add things to this code base because you don't know when you change something what's going to break. There's several different paths, and you never know exactly what's going to happen. And you're going to maybe experience some errors. If you're adding something in one place, it could break something in a completely different part of the code base that you didn't even know attached to there. So how do you get to this state? Is it normal? At the beginning, when you're starting a project, you have some sort of idea. And the time to marketplace and the time to implementation is the most important thing. So you're not really thinking about designing in a way for maintainability. You're thinking about adding features in a timely fashion. You're thinking about scooping the other guy and getting to the marketplace. You're thinking about getting funding and making sure your funders are happy. And what it really boils down to is that doing something new and innovative is really more important than how you're doing it. You have an idea, but you're not quite sure a lot of times what the problem actually is. So what's the end state? You're not quite sure. You're like, hey, I'm going to build a collaboration platform. But does that mean you're doing content management? Does that mean you're doing something like Twitter? You never really kind of know. And so there's this evolution of a company where there's only a couple of you, so you have a small code base, and you really have a lot of collective memory. So it's easy to collaborate with your other coworkers because you're small. You just kind of can turn around and say, hey, I do remember putting this code in, and you're going to have an answer really quickly. I didn't join Box at the time when it was this small, but I've been on other projects. I was at a company before where I was one of the first 5 engineers, and so we on our product, and so we could kind of all had this collective memory, and all could kind of hold the code base in our head. It was very small and very easy to understand. However, at some point, your company grows and things slow down. So you can end up with something like this. So what this is, one of our classes, we kind of knew that it was a mess. It was over 3,000 lines long, and one of our engineers said, hey, I wonder what's actually in it. So this is a snapshot of probably the first quarter of the methods that are in this class. So if you look at it, it doesn't really matter what the methods are. We just decided, hey, what methods are in there? Let's list them all out and try to categorize them. So we have categorized by color what each of these methods kind of do. So red ones destroy an object. Yellow ones are getting an object. Purple ones are getting counts. So there's a lot of methods that do very similar things. And so you're looking at this, and you're going into this class, and you don't really know, do I call, which of the destroy methods do I call? Which does something really useful to me? And a lot of times, since this is only about 25% of the methods, it's hard to discover them, right? So a lot of times you're looking through this, there's 3,000 lines of code, and how do you find the actual method that you want to use? It can be hard to discover. So a lot of times people will just end up adding a new method, and this bloat continues. The other thing is it's really hard to squash bugs if you're in this state. There's, as we said, multiple get methods. So you get a bug that comes in, and you say, okay, it's great, I know exactly how to fix it. So you go fix it in one of these methods. But another code path skips that method entirely and goes through a completely different method. So you're fixing the same bug a lot of times. So you don't know really how to maintain it, and you don't really know how to document it. And it really does slow you down. So at this point, you might be thinking, maybe I should add a framework. And so why should you be doing this? First thing is, it can add some structure to your code. So a lot of times with that was just kind of a mess of methods. So you didn't really know where to look. So you're going to add some structure so you do know where to look. There's separation of concerns. We've all taken intro to programming. That's a good thing to have. And at that point, you really do want your developers to be thinking about the decisions that they're making. So if you're adding a new feature, you want it to be deliberate and to know, for them to know why they're putting something in some place, to be thinking it through, and to be, coding well and to have different bugs, so there's fewer bugs. And you want some framework can be better readable, since you've split things over into classes. And as you're growing as a company, you want people to come up to speed faster, so having them be able to know where to look and know how to add things really can help. At Box, we do something called a new hire bug, which is every new engineer should be fixing a bug within their first week. And so there's this joke that we're all, every new hire basically gets a count bug. And so we're fixing the same bug over and over, and they're digging through this nasty code. And really, these bugs should be fixed, not even there, but just be fixed within a very short time. But it takes a long time for them to do this. So this is all stuff we've all been familiar with. But just so we're all on the same page, let's quickly define what I'm talking about when I mean a framework. So what we mean is we want a generalized cross-cutting design. So a framework shouldn't be used just for one particular problem. It can be used across several different problems throughout your code base. It defines the flow of the program. So instead of a new engineer coming through and every time figuring out a new flow and new methods, the framework should be defining the flow. And so there's a standard behavior. There should be a default behavior to your framework. So as you're invoking it, if you don't do anything, something will happen, and you know exactly what will happen. The default behavior is well understood and well documented. And the framework should be extendable. So if you need specific functionality in a particular area of your code, you're going to add custom behavior by extending your framework. You shouldn't be modifying the code that you have started, that has been provided as a framework. Okay, so you have this legacy code base, and you're thinking, okay, great, I want to put a framework in. So you decide to refactor. So we're going to go over a couple of things to keep in mind with some stories from Box. So we're going to go over how we've created new frameworks, talk about some backwards compatibility, setting our old legacy code, and promoting the adoption of your new framework. So the first thing we did when we decided that we needed to put some more structure into our code was we created a framework team. And this was back in April 2012. And so we were like, great, we want to do something that's really going to be cross-cutting, and we really want to make an impact on our code base. So we looked around and we said, what's something that everyone's using that's really a mess? And so we looked at the action framework. An action framework, just a little bit about our code base. Our actions are the layer that defines an internal API for Box, and this is where all of our business logic should be living. And it's basically for the MVC principle. It creates a clear separation between our models, which interact with the database, and our view, which is what the web app uses. And it should be creating these reusable blocks of business logic, so it can be called from any number of different places. And they should be self-contained. We don't want to be dependent on globals or external state. So the new framework team decides, great, we're going to tackle this. And there were 2 of us. And this was a big problem to solve. There were about 200 to 300 actions at the time. And we said, let's look at it and see how we can make them more usable. And so we looked at our old action framework, and instead of deciding to, it was a lot of spaghetti code. And so instead of just deciding how we should make that better, we said, we're going to throw some more spaghetti code in there. And it's going to, the spaghetti code is going to allow us to validate our input and enforce permissions, which is what we want the framework to do. But we shouldn't have hacked into spaghetti code, which was a mistake number one. The other thing we did was we said, what's not usable about this? And we said, well, we can't really discover it. We have 300 of these guys. And if you want to go and see if something, for example, gets a file, you can't really find it. So we said, we're going to look at it, and we're going to try to have everything be based, all of our actions should be named with this model verb principle. So I want to use a verb, and I want to use a noun. So we're getting a file, or we're deleting a file, or we're saving a file. And so this ended up kind of exploding on us, because there's many ways you can get a file, right? You can get a file by ID, you can get a file by user, you can get a file by group that has access to it. So this kind of exploded. We ignored the single responsibility principle, so instead of get file by user, we just threw a bunch of nullable variables into there. And the new framework was really not easy to use, so we put in these input params, which was this array that you defined that said, what inputs do I need, and do I require them or not? So we had a large array of nullable pointers where our code base is in PHP, so you couldn't tell if there was no easy way to access this param. And you had to put this array at the top of your function. So there was a lot of boilerplate code for the developer to fill in. And it took up the first half of the screen of the file, so it was just really hard to get into the meat of things. And so where did we go wrong with the process? The big thing that was, we looked at a couple, obvious candidates, and we thought we understood the whole problem. We didn't consult with the developers that would actually be using this framework. We talked to maybe one or two of them, but we didn't actually go and dig our hands into like all 300 actions. The old framework had kind of sprawled, and we didn't really know exactly what was being used. The other thing was we were hacking spaghetti code. So we didn't really understand the default behavior, so we were using something we didn't understand. And then we messed with the flow, so we said, hey, we think we know this flow, we're going to just add some permission checking into it. And we were getting a bunch of results that kind of we didn't expect, so we were introducing new bugs into the system. And why did this happen? Well, I think we were uninformed. And we were overconfident that we knew what the problem was. And we were just really gung-ho to make a difference with this new team. So in the end, we just kind of hated what we came up with. We basically violated our own definition of what a framework was. Was it a generalized design? Well, it could be reused, but not in a good way. It was over-engineered. Was there a flow? Yes, but it was too flexible. There were so many endpoints that we didn't know. We let the coder kind of drive how it was done. You could put a ton of nullable variables in. Was there default behavior? We think so, but we didn't really know what it was. And was it extendable? Not really. Whenever we needed to put new functionality in, we went and hacked more spaghetti code instead of making extensions. So we kind of just violated everything we had just said. So this was back in April 2011. We said, OK, we converted maybe 5 actions. And we said, OK, this is great. These ones work. And then I went on maternity leave, and my coworker, he was left by himself, so he moved on to another problem. And so we kind of let this framework languish for a little bit. So fast forward to the beginning of this year, and we had a bunch of new people that came onto our frameworks team. And so we looked around, and they looked around and said, hey, where can I make the most impact? Oh, look, there's this action framework which doesn't quite work the way we want it to. So let's, instead of the new action framework, we're going to create the new action framework. Hey, we can fix this, and just so you're not confused, that's different than the new action framework, which I was just telling you about, which is different than the action framework, which is what we started with. So we had a bit of a naming problem, a bit of a promotion problem within the company. So we looked around, we fixed that. That was easy. We said, okay, the original action framework was a legacy action framework, and then the thing we had done in 2012 became the old action framework. And the thing we did in 2013, that's the new action framework. And so we decided, what can we do to make the most impact? So we made this wrapper around the new action framework, which made it easier to use. So we stopped this sprawl. We said everything should have a single responsibility. We're going to have a wrapper around it, which instead of having all these statics, we're going to keep some state. And it's going to make it a lot easier for the developer to understand and use. Things are going to be a lot shorter. The file's going to be great. And then so we did this in about a month, and we said, hey, look, it's done. And we rolled it out, and then we'd only tried it with one thing, and it wasn't done. It was still hard to use. There was still a lot of boilerplate. So one thing that we learned was really important was to add some automation. So we use PHP. But we all code using an IDE, which is IntelliJ. So one of the things that we learned was really important for adoption was to have some automation tools. Anything that's boilerplate should be able to be automated. You should be able to create a new file with all your boilerplate code, and that should be as part of your rollout. IntelliJ plugins are also very easy to use. So getting everyone, this was a long process. A lot of people had still been coding on Vim as of last year. Moving to something where we could use automation was important. And so rolling things out with automation is also important. Another thing we learned was we need to prevent scope creep. So a lot of what we started with this new action framework was the old action framework is not good. Can we just chuck the whole thing out and start over again? Which is great if you have the time, but in most cases you don't. So iterative design is important. It's important to say, what can I do to make this better and easier to use without throwing the whole thing out? And eventually, if we get to a stable state, we can start and go back to a point where we can kind of redesign the whole thing without being super disruptive. So another thing was the new action framework we defined differently. So there's a big tendency to get your hands into legacy code and say, I want to clean up more than's planned. So you get to this point where you say, I can do things within a week. And then it's a month later, and you're still working on the same project. So it's really easy to say, this would just be better if I had A or if I had B. And it's really important to define your project ahead of time and stick to that plan. A new idea should be a new project and a new scope. So what we did with the new action framework, instead of throwing the old action framework out, we made it better and then put a new project on our backlog to say, let's change these all into commands. And then there's the big thing of testing. So testing, in the ideal world, all your code is well tested, everything has unit tests, everything has integration tests. So if you change your framework, your integration tests should all pass because the end-to-end flow should be the same. You're just kind of changing how you're doing it. In actuality, this is really very rarely the case. So it's important to build some time in to make sure things are tested before you start changing things out from underneath. There also is, the old question of unit testing versus integration testing. Integration testing is what's important to have and put in before you start changing your framework. A lot of times all the method signatures are going to change, so unit testing is going to be work you're not necessarily going to use. But taking the time to put in integration tests is well spent. And then there's backwards compatibility. Another little bit project we took on was redoing our permissioning system. And so what we said was we had these permissions. You have a file. Do you have permission to view it? We'd say, OK, no, you don't. And we just pass an error back up to the web app. And so you just get like this, 404 error or whatever. And this was not very good. Our front-end designers were always asking for more information. They want to know, why don't I have permission to change this file? Why don't I have permission to view it? It might be, your enterprise says you can't view something that your boss created. Great. So instead of throwing an error, you want to say, you don't have permission to view this. Please talk to whoever. So we went and we made this change, and we provide this richer error interface. And we said, OK, great. Do we have access to the entire stack? We're like, yeah, we're just using this in our web app. So we can change this without providing backwards compatibility. And what we kind of forgot was we have a bunch of API users. And so we went and changed this, and we broke some tests, and we broke our rule, and we went and we're like, oh, these tests broke. Let's just fix the tests. And that was not good. So luckily, we changed the tests, and someone from our platform team came over and said, you can't be touching these tests. So had to kind of go back and rethink. So instead of everyone getting we have to also pass back the old errors as well as the new ones. So this was a big lesson for us. And then there's the question of, you have this great new framework. What do you do with the legacy code? So there's two ways to do it. One is to get rid of all your legacy code as you go along. This would be the best way, but sometimes it's not really practical. In our case, we had several hundred actions. And our original plan had been that the frameworks team would convert the entire stack. And we looked around, there were 2 of us, and there were 300 actions, and touching code we didn't know much about. And this is not really practical. So we said, OK, we should ask the developers as they're touching things to change the framework over. But then you're in the situation where you need to keep track of adoption. So we need to make sure everyone is using the new framework and not the old framework. So a couple ways to do this. One of the ways we came up with was having unit tests. So any actions that extended the old framework, we put on this whitelist. So we had a unit test that went through and looked at all actions that extended the old framework and compared it with this whitelist. And if they exactly matched, great, you can go on. If you added something in the old style, this test would fail. And warn the developer that they needed to use the new framework. And this worked for us because you can't push to the line without having all tests pass. And so this kept track of adoption. We had some live documentation that kept track of as well of all the actions and what state they were in. And so this is a little bit of a bummer because you do have to maintain 2 frameworks, but eventually you should be able to sunset. Another trick that we used actually came from our performance team. One of our engineers, David Schnepper, he implemented this tombstoning idea. So what it does is you can put a tombstone on a method. And if that tombstone is hit, it's going to log an error. So if you're on your development environment, it'll throw an error and your tests will fail. If you're on live, it will log an error to Splunk. And so you can say tombstone, this should never be used. And if it is, because it's logged with this error and somebody's monitoring these logs. And then if these tombstones are never hit, you can remove that code safely because you know that no one is using it through your API. So the final step that we went through was how to promote adoption. So our team is small, and we're kind of underneath a bunch of people that are putting new features in. So how do you get the word out that you're working on these cool new frameworks that people should be using? So you need to publicize that you're doing it widely. And so we sat down and decided to come up with a checklist of things for promoting adoption. So the first thing is a proposal. This is kind of like the old elementary school thing, the 5 W's, the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. So who is responsible for it? Who is proposing it? Who is going to use it? We recently used this checklist with our event bus framework. So our event bus is the what. Our event bus is a synchronous pub-sub framework that will allow us to have separation of concerns instead of model objects knowing about each other and calling each other. They can notify this event bus, which then will be the only one that needs to maintain everything. So that's the what, the who's going to use it, different objects that need to talk to each other. The where should it be implemented, what layer of the framework, what layer of our architecture should it be implemented in. The when, this is your prioritization. So this is talking to product management, talking to the other developers. Are there super big bugs that are going to take priority? When can other teams use it? When do they need it? The why, the why for the event bus, we had really strongly coupled code that it shouldn't have been. And yeah, I think that's all of them. The what current projects could use this? How flexible is this framework, and what future projects could be using it? And then it's the proof of concept stage. So this should be your quick and dirty, can this actually be coded? Write a design doc. How am I going to do this? This is the how in your elementary school teacher's checklist. Design doc, how am I going to do this? You're going to announce the framework to the relative parties and the relevant clients, trying to get buy-in. So buy-in from other developers, buy-in from product, buy-in from management. And this is a quick and dirty implementation with fully unit tested. Everything should be fully unit tested at this point. And this should take, the event bus, I think our proof of concept was about a week. So this shouldn't be fully fleshed out because you're not actually using this, you're just seeing if it can be done. The alpha stage is when you're using this framework for a real test case. Again, full test coverage. You're picking a use case that you understand and implementing it. So for our event bus, the frameworks team took on our collaboration layer, and that's what we've been working on for a while, updating. So for delete, we wanted to say, okay, or for the event bus, we wanted to use it in our delete code path. So I'm deleting a collaboration. I also want to delete any tasks associated with that collaboration. So our alpha was saying, putting the event bus framework in, that if I'm deleting something, I'm notifying the tasks to also delete themselves. So it was a simple use case. You don't want anything too complicated because this is just kind of, can this be used? It's important also, though, to make sure that you have basic documentation so the purpose is clear. And source code, PHP unit, or PHP doc, so that anyone coming through can look at these methods and know what they're doing. But it should have warnings also. It shouldn't be for public consumption. It may be on your code base so other people can find it. And then the beta stage. This is when you're going to go around and publicize the framework's existence. And this is also when you can go around and look for other use cases and document which ones should be using the use case, or should be using your framework. And the beta stage, excuse me. beta stage, what's really important is documenting a lot. So documenting your framework, writing up as many things as you can, I don't know. And we publicize using our Confluence. We have an internal blog. We have email. So publicize, documenting. Documenting in the code. So your methods are all documented. Anyone should be able to come through and see what this does. And the documentation should be updated as things arrive. And the owner of the framework should be providing support for its use. This means doing code reviews for people who are using it. This means pair programming with people, taking yourself and sitting with them and watching how they use it. And letting them drive, because you really do want to see how other people are using this instead of, don't try to put your viewpoint on. You want to see that if you're not in control, how people are going to be working. And doing, code walkthroughs of the framework. And your example case is the case that's going to have done in alpha. But the beta is really for it to be put out in the wild and for someone else to use it. It could be someone on your team. It can be someone on a different team. So we used this for the event bus. We worked with our enterprise team, and they used a proof of concept. We found some things that we hadn't thought. We found some edge cases that we really wouldn't have thought of, and just went and updated our framework. After you feel comfortable that all your bugs are ironed out, you're now in GA. So this means that anyone can kind of pick it up and look at it and use it. So there should be full documentation, of course, that you've been working on in the beta stage. Could mean anything if it's a really complicated framework, to having a tutorial, to just blog posts and having documentation. The source code should all be commented. So all public APIs should have full comments. Any private methods everything should really have comments. And you should be notifying relevant groups of the framework's release, so announcements, whatever, and wider education. So make sure people are using it and not doing things the old-fashioned way. Then comes the question of migration, which we touched on earlier. There should be a plan of how we're going to convert the legacy code to use the framework. This doesn't mean you're necessarily doing it. You just are aware of what needs to be done and have it on the relevant backlogs. You can clearly document, clearly mark places, evangelize to your customers about why they should be prioritizing the legacy code. Preventing your legacy code from being used, so tombstones or tombstones or unit tests or any of other creative ways of doing it. And migration, you should have productivity tools to make this easier. So there's, if there are boilerplate codes, you should have your automation done so people can use them for conversion. And providing templates. So any new code, it's really easy to convert. And then hopefully at some point, you're at the point of full adoption. So the way we're keeping track of full adoption is we have a Trello board for tracking our framework's life cycle, just so anyone in our organization can look at this. So these are all of our areas of our checklist, and you can see what's in what place. So we have a layer architecture currently. This was a snapshot from the other week of where things are. That's in alpha. Our event bus is still in beta. And we have our diesel, we said, is done, our singleton framework. And our permissions framework are already done. So this is an easy way for anyone to kind of tell what the team is doing and to put new suggestions up for frameworks that they think should be worked on by the team. So then there's promoting something like having a frameworks team, or something like taking the time to work on tech debt and put frameworks in. So there's a couple different people that you have to evangelize to. So your developers, what kind of questions might they have? Developers might say, how will this make my system more stable? So these are things like you'll be fixing fewer bugs. You'll have a more understandable flow. They also might ask, won't this slow me down? Well, probably. If you can't just throw code up, then you're going to have to actually think about it. So it may take a little bit longer for a developer to put a feature in, but they're paying upfront time, hopefully, for fewer bugs later. And the million-dollar question is, they might come to you and say, well, can't I just work around it this once? I really have a bad day, and I just don't want to learn your new framework. And the answer might be yes sometimes. It might be, I have this deadline I need to make, but it needs to be a conscious decision that you're working around it. It needs to be that I will work around your framework and put some spaghetti code in as long as I go back later and make the time. So you have to say it has to be a known trade-off, and it has to have a plan to go back and put the framework in. And then there's always a little bit more difficult, is the questions that management and the organization might ask. So every month or so, we have meetings with product and with our senior management, and they ask us these types of questions for the team. Say, you're putting frameworks in. When can I see a benefit from this? So why should I invest in this? And the big question, why do you need so much time to do this? You said this will take a week, and it's been a month. Why did this take so much longer? So a couple answers. A lot of times, at least with our frameworks team, we are working in code that we don't necessarily own. And it's not necessarily very clean. So cleaning up code can take a lot longer than you really plan. It's kind of this, it can be a black hole unless you limit yourself. Why should I invest in this? Fewer bugs and more developer happiness is a good answer. And when can I see a benefit from this? That's a million-dollar question. It's hard to put metrics forward. Managers like metrics, right? They want to see things like a bug count going down over time. So, you're getting this many on-call or site issues, and we're putting frameworks in, and they're going down. That's a good metric to have. Clean code is kind of harder to tell, but what we are trying to do is somebody at a hackathon put together a heat map of what methods are being hit. And so can you go through and show that we're removing lines of code that no one is ever using? Are your developers happier? Can you pull your organization and say, hey, developers, what's your biggest pain points? And if they say, it's taking bugs or not knowing where to put code, and you go back 3 months later, next quarter, and ask them what their pain points are, or are they happier about these? Do they say yes? Developers are never happy, but maybe they are not happy about different things. And if you can show it's easier to bring people up to speed, your growth is better, you're getting new features out the door faster, and there's less corruption maybe in your database. Those are all things that the organization will be happy about. So, a few lessons that we learned. There's no such thing as a magic bullet. Frameworks are hard. It's hard to put them in. You can do them wrong the first time. Our actions framework, we didn't do correctly the first time. So we thought we were fixing it, but we didn't understand the problem. So you kind of have to iterate on this a lot. Or sometimes you have a really cool idea, but you can't fully roll it out. Like with our permissions framework, because you need to maintain backwards compatibility. Getting buy-in is important. So you need to make sure that you have support from all layers of your organization, from your managers being willing to invest the time in this for a cleaner code base overall, down to your developers being willing to use your frameworks after you spend the time putting them in. You're going to be sacrificing individual productivity for organizational productivity. The way you develop changes, so code is going to hopefully not balloon as fast because you're not going to be repeating yourself. You're going to know where to put things in. So your code is going to be a lot more maintainable, but it is going to require coordination across teams. It is going to require buy-in from everyone to use. So the individual might be not able to throw things up there as fast, but the next person coming down the line will be able to modify it a lot faster. And so the velocity of the organization increases. The new engineers that you're bringing on can understand your code base a lot better and a lot faster. There's a lot more agility within your organization because people can move between projects more seamlessly as they understand the frameworks. And the other engineers are the customers of the frameworks team. So you need to treat them with respect. If they don't like your framework, there's a reason. If you're not, it means you need to just be going out there and talking to them during the development phase and listening to them. And eventually, the framework you're going to end up having to use the framework that you're putting in. So you're going to need to code like you want to be using it, and yeah. So, are there any questions?
How big is your framework team relative to
So we have a three-part framework team. So we have the framework team that I'm on that's doing all of this small stuff, and that team is 3 people. And then we have the core team, which is responsible for basically our beta stage. So the framework team builds the framework. So we're putting in the event bus. The core team is 5 people, so they're taking our frameworks and testing them out on the collaboration code or the file system. And so that's, I think, 5 people now. We just added another person. And within web app, so that's 8 people. And with a web app, there's, I think, 48 people. So about, oh shoot, 1/6? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it needs to be big enough that you can do these beta testing things and alphas without disrupting other teams, I think.
So you said one of the things that you do when you're trying to get new teams to use it, they can opt out for some period of time, but they can agree to come back later and fix that. Have you actually seen anybody come back and fix that yet?
Yes. So a lot of times it does take a while, right? Our action framework has been around for quite a while. Well, 6 months with our new one. It's long in the development world. But as people are touching actions, they are converting them over. And yeah, so it does take a while, but people don't want to be using the old stuff. So if you've built something good, they do want to be using it, and they will take the time to migrate things over. Especially if you can say, you're going to have fewer bugs, or you're going to... Providing these automation tools was really when we saw the spike in people using them or converting things. Okay, thank you.